Thank you for visiting my office. I appreciate the conversation we had a couple weeks ago. Now that you and Mr. Lutnick have been nominees for several weeks, I'd like to know exactly how much authority do you have on trade matters relative to Mr. Lutnick and other cabinet members?
Thank you, Senator, and I also enjoyed meeting with you in your office and beforehand. Since I'm an honorary constituent, my wife is from Dubuque, Iowa, so thank you. With respect to trade authorities in the United States government, my statute is the statute. It designates the office of the U.S. Trade Representative as the chief trade negotiator, negotiating trade deals. Section 301 enforcement authorities are delegated to the United States Trade Representative. Obviously, the Secretary of Commerce has his own trade authorities over trade remedy laws, export controls. The Treasury Secretary often has sanctions through IEPA. I think what's important to understand about all of this is the President himself is so focused on trade issues. It's something that's very important to him. It's been a key platform, plank in his platform for decades, and he expects that all of his cabinet members and cabinet level members advising him on trade work together and coordinate. So I expect to work very closely with Mr. Lutnick, Mr. Bessent, and White House advisors on trade matters, of course, if I'm confirmed.
Yeah. I have a short statement I want to read, and then I'll ask you to comment on it after I read it. I'd like, while I think it is important to hold China to its obligations under Phase 1 agreement, I also fear that it will keep us reliant upon Chinese markets, so we need to be looking around the world at other markets. We need to balance our short-term profitability with long-term stability. I have for a long time voiced my own concerns about unfair trade practices by China, and I hope that you and President Trump are successful in holding China accountable on issues including fentanyl, intellectual property theft, and government subsidization. That said, I believe we must pursue freer trade with other countries to create new markets so that we can move away from China without losing even more global market share to commodities to Brazil and other countries. The free trade agreements that were negotiated under George W. Bush have resulted in large trade surpluses in key industries like agriculture and manufacturing. And I think we need more free trade. And I know that President Trump is more interested in bilateral agreements than multi-state agreements. And I think if we look away from Brazil and South Korea and Japan and China and EU as being problem countries for us on trade issues, but there's so many other countries where if we have these agreements, and I use George W. Bush as an example and his negotiator, Alan Johnson, about 13 countries, probably 6 or 7 different agreements with countries you don't even think much about being significant in world trade, and they have, we've increased tremendously with these free trade agreements, our surpluses with those countries in trade. So if you want to comment.
Yes, Senator. Everything you just said, I think is really important to keep in mind as we move forward with trade policy. I think obtaining other export markets to make sure that our exporters, our farmers and ranchers and, anyone else, service providers, manufacturers, are not completely dependent on China for their livelihood, because that can be a high-risk proposition. My guess is we'll always trade with China, absent a conflagration, God forbid. But we do have to have diverse export markets for our exporters, and I think that if we can be thoughtful in going to other countries where we see real concrete areas of advancement, we should pursue that. And I'm looking forward to working with you, if I'm confirmed, and the rest of the committee to talk about where we can get the most bang for our buck in other markets to make sure that any agreements we have are aligned with your goals and the administration's goals.
Brazil is a leading competitor with the United States on agriculture. One example is that Brazil has displaced the United States as a world leader in soybean production. Another issue with Brazil that I brought up with your predecessor, Ms. Tai, is drastically unfair advantage Brazil has on ethanol. U.S. exports face a 18% tariff on ethanol going to Brazil. However, Brazilian ethanol comes here nearly duty-free. So I hope you will address this trade imbalance with Brazil that Ambassador Tai wasn't successful in doing, taking action to reduce or eliminate this harmful tariff on American ethanol.
Senator, if I'm confirmed, I will work with you. I have a lot of things at the top of my list, but this is one of those things. I'm happy to work with you if I'm confirmed.